6 churches have burnt down the last week in Canada due to apparent backlash from these residential school information that's coming out. It's been all over the news that they've been finding bodies all over residential schools. This has been known about for a long time, all of these things and these discoveries. And in 2015, before Stephen Harper left, he put out a Truth and Reconciliation documents. There's thousands and thousands of pages people can read that goes over all of this, locations and everything. So it's not new, it's just being used now for political. And Canada isn't the only country to have residential schools. Nearly every continent has had some form of residential school doing the exact same thing, to assimilate the natives into the European culture. And that's what it was used for. And in doing so, they typically have to take them away, educate them in a different manner, break their culture, break their heritage, break their spirit, and then they become zombie slaves like the rest of us. The first residential school in Canada was opened in 1931. It's progressed all the way up until 1996. There was residential schools in 1996 still. In the 1870s, they really started to take off after Confederation. Now, there's a guy named Dr. Peter Bryce, and he was the first one to be assigned to go out and look and see what's happening at these residential schools and check on the health and welfare of the natives. Because when Canada signed the treaties with the natives, they are responsible for the health and welfare of the native people. Now, because they were failing that, they sent out the doctor to see if he could do it as the health minister. He went out to all these schools, and he wrote a damning report in 1907 about all the terrible things that are happening there. And after that, not long after that, he was fired. Now, he was fired. The things that he mentioned was that there is terrible sanitation there. They're not getting the supplies they need. These were run by the church. The church would blame the government and say, hey, you guys have the supplies with the right stuff. And the government would just blame the church, and it would go back and forth, and nothing would ever get done. Tuberculosis was the big problem, and 24% of native children were dying from tuberculosis. In 16 years, one school had lost 75% of the students from tuberculosis. And Dr. Peter Bryce brought up all of these issues to the person that was ahead of him, who was named Mr. Duncan Scott. Mr. Duncan Scott, he didn't like the Indians at all. He wanted to see them annihilated. He has some very troubling quotes about getting rid of the natives. And the government's job was essentially to get rid of the natives, because who has land deals, right? Canada doesn't officially own the land until the natives. Part 2 on the truth about the residential schools. If you haven't seen part 1, check it out. But it basically tells about the whistleblower in the Canadian residential schools. Now, a quick note as well, for anybody telling me to read more about the Indian culture and do all I have 3 minutes for a TikTok video. 3 fucking minutes. This isn't a documentary. Now, from the first one I said, Peter Bryce was the one to whistleblow on the tuberculosis problem that was there. When they went to Duncan Scott, he completely ignored everything he said. Dr. Bryce was saying that there needs to be more air flow through the schools, and there has to be isolation tents set up so the sick kids wouldn't infect the healthy kids. Except the schools were paid per student, so they were jamming as many students as they could into the classroom to get as much money as possible. The government also said that tuberculosis was genetic, not contagious, even though it was known for 40 years that tuberculosis was contagious. This was ignored. So even after these kids came back from summer back into the residential schools, every single one of them had tuberculosis, which means that they were also spreading it to everybody back on the reservations. All of this was ignored by Duncan Scott. So nothing came back on him. Now what the Minister of Indian Affairs, Duncan Scott, ended up doing was hiring somebody to replace Dr. Bryce, who was completely incompetent at his job and favored things like child labor, did not want any women's rights. He was probably the worst choice for a chief medical officer, but he was willing to toe the party line. A bill actually went through Parliament to help give Indian special medical services. It was included in the first run of the bill, but in the second passing of the bill, they actually took this section out. So the Indians would not get any medical services added onto it. Not only that, but the capital the capital of Canada, where Parliament is, Ottawa, received 3 times the funding than all of the residential schools in Canada. Ottawa received 3 times the amount of money for their health than all of the residential schools did. Nothing's changed. It was criminal. Everything went unchecked. Nobody did anything at all, and nobody at the end was stuck with any responsibility of anything that happened at the residential schools. Rather, it was largely ignored by the government, never published into the public, and the only way the public heard about it was just by rumors going around. The official documents were always hidden away from the public. With the top medical advice at the time available to them, they still chose to ignore it all. It's a big, deep rabbit hole for what happened to the natives. And so, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go down all that because it's a lot.